unanimous. Still have a quorum. First order of business is to approve the minutes of the last meeting. Did everybody have an opportunity to review? Any thoughts, corrections?
So moved.
Second. Moved and seconded. All in favor of approving the minutes?
And roll
Aye.
call, please.
And John King for the roll call.
I have to abstain because I wasn't at the meeting,
All right, we have one abstention. But
for which I
otherwise,
apologize, by the way.
no problem, John.
Hi, John.
So the minutes are
Hello.
approved. I think I have the agenda in front of you. I think the next on the agenda is just a legislative update, and maybe Genevieve, you want to take the lead on that?
Sure, I would be happy to. Good afternoon, everyone. So we are tracking a number of pieces of legislation. There are 6 priority bills, and similar to a couple of weeks ago, only 2 have been printed. The Transportation Committee will wait for all of the bills that are going to transportation to be printed before they have a public hearing day, a Ferry day, if you will. Something to keep in mind, though, that's really important to know is that as soon as bills are being printed and referred, things are moving very quickly after that point. So the legislature typically has a 2-week public hearing notice and then a 1-week public hearing notice. That notice requirement is no longer in place. That's typical for the way the legislature operates. So we really need to, as these bills come out, as we receive copies and we have an opportunity to review them, if we have suggestions for amendments or language changes we'd like to see, any edits, things that we want lawmakers to consider, we really need to be pretty quick at getting that feedback to lawmakers and to the committee. So not a lot has changed other than the tempo of the legislature has picked up significantly.
Great, thanks for that update. Do you think it makes sense then to have maybe a placeholder meeting weekly so that if there is something to discuss, we have a meeting set? I don't know how everybody feels about that. Shay, you're busy. What do you think about that, Genevieve? Just having a meeting scheduled, so if there's something to discuss, we have a meeting, but then perhaps the day before or a couple days before, if there's nothing that has come out to discuss further, maybe we postpone it till the next week.
I was going to say, I would leave some flexibility in there. I do know that Representative Falkingham's bill was returned to the revisor's office today, so could print as soon as tomorrow or Monday. We're still waiting for Senator Grahowski and Representative Eaton's bills. They have not received drafts from the revisor yet. So that would potentially, I would think it may happen next week, and those could potentially be out at the end of the week. So yeah, I think it's a good idea to meet more frequently, but also keep that flexibility in place in the event that there hasn't been a lot of change.
Okay, so I think we can all be available by email or by phone as things come up, and if we need to schedule a meeting sooner to discuss legislation that's come down the pipe, we can do that.
Genevieve, can we just maybe as a matter of standard operating procedure, if these things get printed as LDs, can you just ship them out to us?
Yes, I can, and I have been, and we've had a couple of opportunities to obtain drafts before they have been printed. So there's a window where a legislator will approve the language and send it back to the revisor's office. So as documents come into my possession, I'm happy to share those with you via email.
No, that I think would help kind of smooth the rails a little bit.
Yep, and nothing has come out since we last had a meeting.
Okay.
There are a couple of things right on the cusp, though.
Sorry, Gabe, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just didn't want to lose the thought.
No problem. No problem. Any questions for Genevieve or about legislation right now? Hearing none. I know I just talked with Peter a little bit right before this meeting about the advisory board meeting today, and it sounds as though an initial impression of the ferry service changing its mind about whether they wanted to keep boats on or off island is maybe still back on the table. And Bill Pulver represented today at the meeting that there still was the plan to move boats off of the island and keep them off island. So I think that's still a live issue, whereas we thought perhaps it wasn't going to be. I also wanted to add into the mix something that has come up at the finance subcommittee meeting for the advisory board, of which myself, Peter, John King, and John Emerson of North Haven are all members of. I think it might be worth having at least having a discussion in terms of the legislation that is going to be proposed and whether some amendments might include thoughts about what is and is not an operating expense for the Maine State Ferry Service. And I know this is a conversation that we've had at the advisory board and at the finance subcommittee level for several years with things like the unfunded pension liability, whether or not that's properly categorized as an operating expense. And of course, the implication is that operating expenses have to be made up by fare box revenue of 50%. So if it's not an operating expense, it doesn't need to be made up by fare box revenue. So that amount is no longer part of why tariffs would increase. And so I think right now, unfunded pension liability is more than $1 million. I recently, a couple days ago, wrote a letter to the ferry service suggesting that the repairs to the Market Chase Smith that currently underway should be categorized as capital expenditures and not operating expenses. Sounds like they were not super enthusiastic about that, although it does seem like replacing shafts on that boat, especially in the context of the boat not being replaced because they couldn't find a bid low enough, and perhaps federal funding will be limitedly available going forward. It does seem like the repairs that we're looking at right now are not your regular maintenance type repairs. And it does see, and that's, you know, several $1 million, and every year for the past few years, I think they've blown the budget on repairs, mostly because the boats haven't been replaced on the schedule as designed. And so now we're in old boats, undertaking large repairs. And if we didn't have that as part of the operating budget for the ferry service, then we would be needing to collect a lot more or a lot less in fare box revenue. So ticket prices would not have to go up. We're talking about rates increasing by 30%. High speed peak. Okay, you can come sit. So so I think it's worth at least having the conversation about whether or not we should be suggesting legislation that somehow governs or provides guide rails to what is and is not an operating expense in the context of the ferry service. I just want to throw that out there as a potential point of discussion.
And this is a really good time to be considering that. So we have a number of bill vehicles here, and two of these bills are they both have to do with regulatory oversight, and so are likely to be merged into one bill, which will leave us a vehicle to do something like that. So there is, if you will, a placeholder vehicle to use for a different idea. So let's talk more about that.
Yeah, I'll CC you the email I sent, Genevieve. I didn't include you on that with the advisory board, but I'll send that to you so you can see what I sent the ferry service. And okay. Excuse the kids here.
I have two that I've locked out on the other side of this door, so you're good.
So anyway, I just want to throw that into the mix as something that I think would be really worthwhile, especially in the context of the great discussion that's happening sort of parallel to this discussion about ferries, emergency response, and the birthing of ferries. And so that is at least part of the mix. Any other thoughts? Go ahead.
Well, just one clarification is I'm not a member of the finance subcommittee. Maybe I'm an advisor to it, like Elon Musk or something.
John is a valued member. An ex-member. The meetings are open to the public, and John has graciously attended, and as an ex-member of the finance subcommittee is very familiar with the things we've been talking about for the last few years anyway. And so it's good to have you there, even if you're not a full-fledged member.
Well, I just don't want anyone to be confused. Yeah. The other thing is, it just crossed my mind, if we go forward that way, we should think about maybe having someone who's a CPA as kind of an expert witness that could testify in front of the legislative committee on the unfunded pension liability being an operating expense or not. I've always thought it isn't, but I'm not a CPA. And along the lines of the work that is currently being done with the Margaret Chase Smith and whether or not that's really a repair or a capital expense, because I think what they're doing with the Margaret Chase Smith is supposed to last 5 or 10 years, and it would clearly be a capital expense. But again, I'm not a CPA, and it might lend some weight to things. Just throwing it out for now. We don't need to do anything right away, but just a thought.
depending on where we go and what type of fight we think we're up against, and how nuanced the accounting is for what is and is, I mean, I think that, I know you and I have talked about this, about sort of the novelty of having the way the legislature has set up the Main State Ferry Service and having certain portions be made up by fare box revenue, just creates a sort of a strange and unusual situation that I think CPAs, it's not like a regular occurrence to have that conversation about unfunded pension liability and exactly where that should be categorized. So it probably would be helpful to have somebody who is knowledgeable generally with accounting, a CPA, opine about that. Because I don't think there's an easy answer out there, because it's just not, it doesn't happen, you know, we don't run into this necessarily.
No, this is pretty odd.
Yeah.
For sure.
Any other thoughts about the ferry service, emergency response, legislation, anything while we're here for this meeting?
I guess just, not to lump too many issues together, but I know Steve Pendleton on the select board had brought this up at a previous meeting, thinking that one of the bills was designed to address that percentage split between Bucks, office rates and general fund, and I wasn't aware that I wasn't expecting any language within this to try to doing any tackling of that, but I just wanted to check that assumption.
So I have no reason, some of these bills we haven't seen, but I have no reason to believe that they contain language that addresses that issue. They certainly can if we propose an amendment, but I don't believe any of them do. I think I have seen bullet points or had a conversation with the sponsor of every single one of these bills. And so that's, yeah, I do not believe it's included at this time.
I'll throw out there that my feeling is we're better off, pushing around the edges with things like unfunded pension liability and what is an operating or a capital expenditure, especially in the context of repairs to boats, where the big money is, and not fighting about the percentage, because I think that will really potentially open up a conversation to, perhaps the DOT, Main State Ferry Service, covering less of a percentage, which is not where we want to go. And if the conversation is simply about how expenses are categorized, it's a little more nuanced, but less likely to bite us, I think.
And I mean, there's a huge potential upside.
Yes, there's a big potential upside of perhaps even up to, let's say, 20-25% of the budget. So it's a lot of money.
So DOT is going to take the opportunity in these bills, even if it isn't completely relevant to the topic at hand, to highlight the cost of the Main State Ferry Service. So they're going to open up that conversation, whether or not we do, or whether or not it is included in the language, just for fair warning. And so being able to push back on some of that, having a CPA talking about these other, issues that have an impact, explaining, frankly, to the lawmakers the difference between an operating expense and a capital expense. We may want to do the same and include that information in testimony as we refine, what those statements are going to be, what your positions are, your issues of concern as we move forward in this process, because DOT certainly is going to take advantage of this opportunity to do that.
I think we should be ready to push back. This is something that Bruce Van Note brought up lots about how expensive it is. And I think there's a lot of room to push back about the cost to serve one individual resident. He likes to take the population of the island at its lowest in the winter and divide the cost of the ferry service and ignore the hundreds of people who work over here and the summer population and the overall. I just think and really like the cost of building a bridge in northern Maine that, I've never been to, and the slippery slope that arrives when you start doing that kind of math, and pretty soon you're only serving Portland and Bangor and perhaps Augusta, because that's where you have population centers. By expenditures like that's where you can justify those expenses when you divide the cost by the number of people. It means a rural state. I think there's a lot of room to push back on that narrative.
I think the bill that they are going to use as their vehicle to deliver that testimony is the bill to expand ferry service to Matinicus, because it gives them an opportunity to talk about expenses.
Yeah.
I did make the point at the meeting today that Islesboro, I said, had a summer population of about 5,000. And I thought that all the islands drew in the summer, and that should be the number we're thinking about, not the wintertime population.
Or really, the number we should be thinking about here is every day, 100 people come over on the ferry to this island to go, just to work. They don't live here, they come back and forth. And that's a pretty important economic engine for the mid-coast area. People come from a long way to work here, North Haven, Vinyl Haven, and the other islands. So that's certainly a consideration that ought to be brought up to the legislature's attention, that it's not just people on the island. When the costs go up for the ferry, it impacts the people who work on the island, which are from a lot of surrounding towns.
How many people go from the island to the mainland to work?
Not that many, a handful, I bet.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know there's a few that I know, but I don't know that there are that many who go from island to the mainland.
As far as daily commuters, I think there's more that are doing longer trips.
Yeah, there's more that do longer trips. There's more that do a week away for work. So
You have a student population that goes to the mainland though, right?
there are some students who go to the mainland. There's a vocational school that some students go to. But I think there are a lot more students who come to the island. I don't know what those numbers are, but the magnet population of the school has gone up.
I'm gonna say 20 to 25, and maybe it's 30, as high as 30 of students, mainland students that come over to the island every day. And I would guess it's at least 5, maybe more students that come from the island to go to the vocational school in Rockland.
Okay.
Any time I've seen on the first boat in Lincolnville, there's quite a charge of workers going on the boat, ferry boat. Quite a charge of workers going on the Quicksilver.
Yeah.
So
That's
I
right.
think you're looking at 50, 75 people.
Yeah.
At best. A lot of them.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who come over every day, more in the summer even.
And by vehicle, there's that many more.
Any other thoughts, questions? Anything else while we're here on tonight's meeting, or should we talk about setting our next meeting?
I was just gonna say, they know how many ferry tickets are sold every year. I don't remember the exact numbers, but in the some of that grant proposal prospectus literature and stuff, they had the numbers about how many vehicles and how many passengers the Ellsboro ferry moves every year. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I have the document somewhere.
Yeah, so we do have the ridership information from the ferry service. They circulate that to the advisory board, so that's something we can come up with if you're interested pretty quickly. And then I don't believe that it's broken, that what they sent us is broken down by boat, for example, like the first boat, which is maybe an important benchmark for commuters who are working.
No, it's not.
Yeah, but they do have the overall ridership numbers broken down by month, and even by week or day. I think that comes in on a daily tally from the boats.
And by trips to Islesboro and trips to Lincolnville.
Yeah. So
They can get you the numbers on that first boat though, because when the original plans for the successor to the Margaret Chase Smith had seating for about, if I recollect correctly, 54 people. And I went to Bill Geary and I said, that's just completely inadequate. And can you do a count? And he could do a count very easily. And he confirmed that over 100 people are on that walking on that first boat every day.
yeah,
Certainly the numbers are kept on the boat for sure.
you can go see.
The tally is made.
Okay, so with that.
Can
so
I
with
ask a
that-
question?
Oh, yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, There's the talk about the CPA being a consultant for us, and that seems like an important thing. Is anybody going to move ahead on that? I'm just spectating here and wondering. It seems like we ought to work on that sooner than later.
Yeah, I think so. So someone is gonna have to spearhead talking with a CPA, and I think probably the first step is gonna be an informal discussion about what their opinion is. I mean, we don't necessarily want to engage them and have a an opinion that is not going to be helpful. So I think we really would want to just start the ball rolling with a conversation on the front end to say, this is what we're thinking, is your base, before they dig into.
Right, but who's going to do that? Who among you is going to check with the CPA to find out?
Does anybody want to volunteer for checking with a CPA?
Does anybody want to volunteer with a check?
Or just a consultation?
Well, hey, you start the ball rolling and get ready to start paying money.
I'll have a conversation
And
with
you
Jim
well,
about
at best you're going to try to find a forensic CPA who can be willing and able to testify, and all this stuff costs money. So, I think you raise a valid point, but it may be a little bit premature unless we know someone who has. If we know someone who's perhaps not a forensic CPA, but who we could just maybe consult with, who would be willing to do that. Anybody know somebody like that? The silence is deafening.
I could certainly give you an idea just with a phone call or a quick visit, to see if they could help or not and what the cost might be, I would think, depending on what
Yeah.
we want.
Well, just off the top of my head, the issue that Gabe raised between operating expenses and capital expenses, I think are probably subject to, generally accepted principles of accounting.
Mm.
The unfunded pension liability issue, which is now up at $1 million a year, is completely, as far as I know, without precedent. So you're going to need someone who's pretty facile and fast on their feet to figure that one out.
I think you all ought to start looking. It sounds like the bills could move fast at some point. If you're doing a meeting every week, you could find out there's a hearing coming up before you've even made a call.
Gabe, who was that you were talking about possibly speaking with?
me. I mean, Janet, I was gonna talk with Janet about what funding might be available for through the town to
Oh, I
see
see. Yeah.
even what we know we might be able to spend, right? If it's, that's maybe, it's not here right now, but I think that's probably the first step, is understanding even if we have a budget or what the budget is. I mean, if we're looking for someone pro bono to give this opinion, it's not gonna be the most successful, so we need to at least understand what we might be able to spend before we go down that road. I don't think it makes sense to do it the other way around, try to find somebody, see what they'll charge, and then see if we can come up with that money. It would be nice to if we have funding and what that funding might be, or at least a ballpark. And I think Janet
Sure.
could let us what's there and available. I mean, we have some funding set aside for Genevieve. And then I don't know what's in that account or what might be possible. So I think that I'll talk with Janet. I'll shoot her an email tonight and maybe talk with her tomorrow to know more about that. And then perhaps we'll circulate an email, see, I mean, I've got an accountant that I use for my business, but I'm not clear that that's necessarily the right person, but he might be able to point me to somebody else too. So that's a possibility.
Yeah. Another possibility is I can check with some of my former partners too, pretty easily and get some names. But before I do that, it would probably be a good idea to see if we have some money.
Yeah. So I'll follow up with Janet tonight. When I get off this meeting, I'll send her an email and just give her the weather report about that potential and what might be available for funding, so.
Right.
Well, so maybe Shay, you want to wrap up this meeting here before this wraps up.
Sounds good.
Shay, I have a question. Have we considered doing a survey of companies who come to the island, because it's not only there were 150 pedestrians last week who went off on the 3:30 boat, but all of the companies and the range, people are not all local. They're coming cross Maine, many of them an hour away. And have we ever done a survey to find out all the companies involved in profiting off of their very lucrative clients on the island?
I'm not aware, I mean, I think the several years ago, we did a survey around ridership and, John, do you remember if we captured any, information about kind of where people were coming from with that survey?
I do not. I don't think we did. I don't think we drilled down to that extent, Shay.
Yeah.
So just, keeping in mind, it's really who's coming from the island, right? So they're not, DOT isn't proposing eliminating a boat, right? And so people who come to the island are still able to do that piece. It's really drilling down into people leaving and the importance. I mean, there's certainly a lot of compelling arguments being made about EMS, but when you're talking about ridership, it's who depends on that morning boat, that first run to get to the mainland.
I'm just thinking of the angle of validating our economic visibility in the whole state of Maine. And it just seems like we sometimes very underestimate our influence and impact. And we impact a lot of employers as well as employees. And so I don't know if we've ever taken a tack to really do a more comprehensive survey. I worked at the ferry for 2 years, so it's amazing how far away people travel to come work on our island. It's not just Islesboro, it's not just Midcoast. People come to work as far as New Hampshire, Massachusetts. And so it just could be a very interesting comprehensive survey that I'm not sure if it's been done.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it's something that's been done, and I think, to do something like that, do that kind of like economic study well would be incredibly expensive and detailed to pull together, and do well, but I think, it is helpful, I think, to Genevieve's point around, around messaging with the legislature. Certainly if we have folks that we know their business relies on the ferry and having a schedule that at least doesn't change, with having which side the ferry starts on could be folks at least sort of broaden the number of voices that come to Augusta to demonstrate how wide an impact this may have.
Well, one source would be the reservations, because there we have on record from the last 10 years, and it's the companies who are making multiple reservations every day of the week. That would be very strong influence for Maine and for Islesboro. So we do have documents we could draw upon to put together a survey.
Great, thanks for that suggestion. Sonia, I see you have your hand raised.
Do we, as an islander, I don't want the boat to start on the mainland, but do we know that all the off-island companies and the workers don't want it to start on the mainland because their day might start earlier? And I have heard from numerous customers, if you guys had a 6 o'clock boat, I'd be on it. So it might be opening a can of worms. Those 100 walk-ons Monday through Friday, 8 o'clock, might want the boat to start on the mainland or earlier.
Well, that's certainly an interesting thought. Thank you for bringing that up. I hadn't really thought about that in terms of what if they started the day sooner and that gave people on the mainland an earlier boat to come over. I certainly suspect that workers would want to come on an earlier boat. I don't know that they have a plan that I've heard about how the boat living in Lincolnville would impact the schedule, whether that means they would start earlier or whether that means they wouldn't have a 7:30 off the island. I don't think that that has been fleshed out in a meaningful way at this point. But it's certainly something to think about in terms of what that schedule might look like. And if it looks like an early boat, then maybe there's others who are interested in that schedule change because it helps them with their work. So that's certainly something
Yeah,
we're
even-
important.
Even if they keep the schedule, like 7:30 is the first boat, it just happens to leave Lincolnville at 7:30. And I agree, I don't think the DOT's thought far enough ahead to know how they might adjust the schedule or when the boats would leave.
There's a lot of possibilities in terms of an earlier boat, or as you mentioned, flip-flopping so that the schedule is the same, but it's just the ports are opposite, starts in, so.
I think that's a really good point. Just certainly want to be aware of that moving forward.
Yeah, my concern with the ambulance association is simply that the ferry is berthed on Islesboro. And if we start acquiescing to the idea that, oh yeah, it could start on the mainland because of the workers, that's not going to help the argument of keeping the ambulance here. And then the ferry here so it can go over at 2 a.m.
Indeed, in fact, it might pit the community here against people who work on the island, which is not where we want to be, for sure.
No, no.
Any other thoughts? Hearing none, let's, anybody have a suggestion for our next meeting? Okay, were you just looking at the calendar?
I was just looking at the calendar. I mean, it does seem if Genevieve thinks that we're likely to get some more bills released at the beginning of next week, it seems like it would be smart to have something at least as a placeholder on the calendar. Unfortunately, it looks like, I know next Wednesday is booked with select board budget and select board meeting, and then Thursday, it looks like there's meetings here starting at 3 and another one at 5.
So my suggestion is to let's see what comes out this week. And I mean, we can certainly set a meeting date right now. But I think we should see what comes out and connect via email. If that works for you.
Let's set a meeting in 2 weeks and then we'll connect by email and if
There we
if
go.
there's
We
something
need
we're
an
talking
emergency
about.
meeting, we can.
Yeah, if we need an emergency meeting, we'll schedule it. So 2 weeks from today, what is today? It's gonna be next month,
April 3rd.
April 3rd. Any objection to April 3rd at the time we've been meeting, which is 4:30 by anybody?
Hang on,
All right, Peter?
I'm gonna fail, I don't know why. Yeah, April 3rd is great.
April 3rd it is. So April 3rd, 4:30, we'll meet then, and then in the event that there's something that we need to talk about ahead of time, we'll schedule via email and set a meeting before then. And of course, that will be noticed that the town does, so we'll give everybody an opportunity who wants to be here to participate, so. All right, with that, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Move second. All in favor? Aye. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Genevieve.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.